Being the Android fan I am, you'd think I'd have had some experience with Samsung, but really, I haven't. Ever since I got my first smartphone, it's been either LGs or iPhones. That is until I discovered the Google Pixels, and from that day, I've never looked back. But there was a time in 2019 where I almost pulled the trigger on a brand new Prism White Galaxy S10e. I remember seeing this thing in a Best Buy and thinking, this is the perfect size for a phone. Next to my Pixel XL, the perfectly pocketable size with an almost bezel-less display and hole punch camera was very tempting. But instead I went for the Pixel 4, which was a fantastic phone, but that's a topic for another video. Fast forward about 5 years later and I'm scrolling eBay at midnight again, looking for fun things I can't afford. And that's how I ended up with this Samsung Galaxy S10e. So how does this phone hold up in 2024? To find out, I put my SIM in it and threw my Pixel 6 Pro in a drawer to hibernate for a bit while I carried the S10e as a daily driver. Let's just talk about the design of this phone for a minute, because it's probably what hit me the hardest coming from a giant phablet. It's not quite as small as the iPhone 12 mini, but it still fits perfectly in a pocket and is comfortable to hold in the hand. Up front we've got a 5.8-inch AMOLED display that is plenty bright and sharp enough to keep most people happy. The bezels are also kept to a minimum here, with the chin being the only exception. Around back we've got two cameras, a 12 megapixel main camera and a 16 megapixel ultra-wide lens. It's all backed up by a Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 and 6 gigs of RAM, so while it's no gaming champ, you don't have to worry too much about slowdowns or multitasking issues. You can definitely feel some lag when trying to do heavy multitasking, but that's just what you'd expect from a budget device this old. While we're on the topic of speed, let's talk about that fingerprint reader, because back when the phone came out, it was probably the fastest fingerprint reader out there. And you know what? That still stands true today. It's definitely faster than the one in my Pixel, but accuracy is a little hit or miss. Combined with the slightly too high placement and the thinness of the fingerprint reader power button combo, it often takes more than one try to actually get the phone unlocked, especially if you're trying to unlock it with your left hand. It also seemed extra sensitive to any dirt on the reader or my finger, which maybe that's on me, I don't really know. Bottom line, it's fast, just sometimes it doesn't feel that fast. Okay, let's talk software. The S10e is running Android 12 with One UI version 4.1. I honestly have no idea what One UI is at today, but I don't feel like this version of One UI looks ugly or old. The way it looked didn't really bother me that much. What absolutely did bother me though was Samsung's annoying shortcuts to their useless services. For example, I didn't like Samsung's default button style navigation, so I switched it to the much more intuitive swipe gestures, which I was happy to find worked basically the same as on my Pixel. What I didn't know was that the swipe from the bottom of the display also launches Samsung Wallet by default, and a swipe in from the right opens a toolbar with recent apps, getting in the way of attempted back gestures. Of course, there's also the infamous Bixby button, but that's already been talked about by everyone ever, so I'm not gonna bother. Sure, these can all be more or less remedied, but I just don't like Samsung services. Replacing the One UI with Launcher and the Samsung keyboard with Gboard makes me feel more at home coming from a Pixel. As far as software glitches go, the S10e has been super reliable, other than the camera app somehow growing a second shutter button. Poor cell reception has been a little bit of an issue for me, though to be fair, I live in an area where T-Mobile cell reception is a little spotty, so even my Pixel struggles to find service sometimes. The reception issues I experienced with the S10e, however, were a little more unusual. Sometimes after losing signal and then getting to an area where there's coverage again, the phone either still can't get a signal, or it shows it's picking up several bars but acts like it can't use them for mobile data. Even more annoying were times where text refused to send. For the most part, I could receive text fine on the S10e, but I was sometimes unable to respond to text for several minutes. Now this may not be an issue with the device, because after switching to the Google Messages app instead of Samsung's default Messages app, I haven't had any issues with texting at all. So I could say the issue is remedied, but I can't. It's unacceptable to have to install an app just to get text messages working. That should be something that works right out of the box. And honestly, I still don't know if it's working correctly. It's unfortunate that I can't trust this phone with such a basic feature as text messaging. Calling, on the other hand, hasn't given me any issues at all with incoming or outgoing calls. It is a little annoying that voicemail doesn't just work automatically. Apparently I have to call a number to set it up, something I've never had to do with any of my Pixel phones. To lighten the mood a little bit, let's talk about some cool unique things this phone can do. Unlike modern phones we see today, the S10e has both a 3.5mm headphone jack and expandable storage via an SD card. Admittedly, I live without these things just fine, but I actually made good use of both during my time with the S10e. And despite my earlier apparent dislikes for Samsung software, there are also some fun little Samsung software features that I actually liked. The Samsung weather app is actually a lot more appealing than I expected. Even the iPhone's weather app looks old in comparison. Sure, it's not super super detailed, and anything you tap will just take you to the Weather Channel website, but I just love a pretty weather app. While I couldn't use it because of battery life concerns, the customizable always-on display is a cool feature much needed on the Google Pixel. Dynamic lock screen wallpapers are also a fun little feature that lets you choose a theme, and the phone will pick a new wallpaper from the theme every time you turn on the display. Maybe not as useful as now playing from the Pixel, but I digress. I really feel like there's not a whole lot to talk about when it comes to camera quality, but since it's such a big make or break topic when it comes to smartphones, I'm obviously not going to ignore it. If you're expecting a really good pair of cameras, sorry, but this phone is going to disappoint you. On the other hand, if you were thinking these cameras would suck, I've got some good news. They don't suck. By now you've already seen several shots I got with both the wide and main cameras. Most of the time I was actually pretty impressed with the color reproduction and high dynamic range in the outdoors photos I got with this thing, especially from the wide angle camera. Oddly, the phone often gave photos from the wide angle lens more contrast in color, meaning not only are the wide angle photos just more fun, on the S10e they might end up looking a little better than photos from the main camera. Unsurprisingly, photo quality on both cameras falls dramatically when the light drops anywhere below broad daylight. There is a night mode which works fine, but it can't stand up to the Pixel's night sight. Video quality isn't much more impressive, although I kind of expected it to be worse. The quality of the videos from the S10e isn't the worst part though. The strange bluish purplish colors these videos have is what really makes me not like videos from this thing. Despite that, I still promised myself that I would use this phone as a daily driver until I got this video out. So many of the clips in my recent video about the Sony Ericsson K800i were actually shot on the S10e. And I mean, it did work. There are quite a few more features I could talk about here, like the Pro modes and variable aperture, but I didn't really find myself using any of those during the time I used this phone. Everyone's gonna have a different use case for their phones though, so one thing I should probably mention that didn't really bother me, but might be a big deal for others, is the battery life. There's no denying it, this battery wasn't great to start with, and it hasn't aged well. I don't have numbers to back this up, but when in use, the battery drops about 50% every hour, maybe more if you're doing something more intense like gaming or GPS navigation. This was never an issue for me, with my usage being pretty light most days, and I'm always near a charger, whether at my desk or in my car, so if I need some juice, it's there for me when I need it. If you need a phone with a strong battery though, this is definitely one to avoid. Of course, the previous owner's usage habits will also affect this, but it's just an old battery, so it's best to expect some battery life degradation. So why did I really buy this phone? It's a huge downgrade from what I was using before, and I really don't even use Samsung devices that much, so it doesn't really make sense that I would want this thing. Of course, there's the curiosity to see if it was really as awesome as I thought it would be back in 2019, but more importantly, this phone cost me about $80 US pre-owned from eBay. At that price, the bar is so low to begin with, I would say almost anyone would be perfectly happy with this phone at that price. Does the battery life suck and the camera underwhelm? Sure, I guess so, but will it fail to do all the stuff you'd expect from a smartphone? Definitely not. Even with the several gripes I had with this thing, I do really like the small size, and it really kept up with whatever I needed it to do. But you probably knew this was coming. There's another phone that goes for a similar price on eBay, and that is the Google Pixel 4a. Now this is entirely my personal opinion, not an objective comparison, but if I were to recommend one of the two, I'd always pick the Pixel. The software is cleaner, more reliable, and yet includes just enough features to give you everything you need. Again, the S10e is a good phone for the price, that just doesn't really make it better than some of the other options. If you want a Samsung device, need it to be super affordable, and don't need great battery life, the S10e is absolutely for you. I am of course aware that some people find pre-owned device buying to be a daunting task, so while that may be a factor for some, if you're looking for a deal, pre-owned is sometimes the only way to go, and I'm not sponsored by eBay or anyone else. I can say with absolute confidence, there isn't any brand new phone out there that you could get for this price that would be worth it, so it's really either pre-owned or pricey. While I did enjoy my time with the S10e, I will be happy to be putting my SIM back into my Pixel 6 Pro, but if you'd like to see me try some other Samsung devices in the future, let me know in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.